A 7-year-old girl covered in bruises walks into a roadside diner and makes a choice that will change everything. SHE passes elderly couples, truck drivers. Ordinary people who could help her. But SHE walks straight to a table of Hells Angels, men whose leather vests and hard faces make most people cross the street. With a split lip and one eye swollen shut, SHE asks them a question that stops them cold. Are you strong? The what happens next brings 5 dangerous men to their knees and proves that sometimes the fiercest protectors were the scariest faces. This is the story of a child's desperate courage and the brotherhood that answered her call. The morning sun barely crested the San Francisco peaks when Hrix Callahan pulled his Harley-Davidson into the gravel parking lot of Edge's diner. The iconic red neon sign flickering against the pale Arizona sky. The air smelled of pine and dust, that distinctive high desert scent that defined Flagstaff in early September. Behind him, 4 more motorcycles rumbled into formation. Their chrome glinting as the riders killed their engines in practiced synchronization. Hrix swung his leg over the bike, his leather vest creaking as high stretched muscles stiff from 3 hours of riding. The vest bore the unmistakable patches of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Colors that commanded respect and sparked fear in equal measure across the American Southwest. At 43, Hrix had worn those colors for 20 years, earning every inch of leather through loyalty, brotherhood, and a reputation that preceded him into every room he entered. About time we stopped, Royce Martinez said, removing his helmet to reveal a shaved head tattooed with intricate geometric patterns. My back is killem. Mistrzostwom Europy. Jure Gettemold, brother. Damon Cross laughed, his barrel chest shaking beneath his own vest. At 51, Damian was the oldest in their riding group, a former Marine whose weathered face told stories of 2 wars and 3 decades. With the club. We're all getting old, Hendricks replied, his voice carrying the gravel of too many cigarettes and desert winds. That is why we stop at the Eddies instead of pushing through to Albuquerque. The 5th member of their group, a younger rider named Tucker Brennan, was already heading toward the Guinness entrance, his boots crunching on gravel. First rounds on Mistrzostwom Europy if they still make those cinnamon rolls. Edge's Diner sat on Old Route 66, one of those timeless establishments that had survived the interstate highway system by sheer stubbornness and quality food. The building itself was a chrome-sided classic from the 1950s, complete with red vinyl booths, a black and white checkered floor, and a jukebox that actually worked. Locals loved it. Tourists photographed it. Bikers had been stopping there for generations. The bell above the door chimed as Hrix pushed inside, immediately hit by the aroma of fresh coffee, frying bacon, and warm cinnamon. The diner was about half full, early enough to miss the breakfast rush, late enough that the morning regulars had settled into their routines. A few heads turned as the 5 bikers entered, but most patrons simply nodded or went back to their meals. This was Arizona after all. Bikers were as common as tumbleweeds. Hrix Callahan, a voice called from behind the counter. I was wondering when you boys would roll through again. Edgy Kowalski, the Guinness 70-year-old owner, wiped his hands on his apron as he grinned at the newcomers. Edgy was a Vietnam veteran. Himself, a man who respected the club's code, even if he'd never worn the colors. His establishment had become an unofficial safe haven for riders, a place where they could eat in peace without judgment or trouble. Couldn't stay away from your coffee, Edgy, Chris replied, sliding into their usual booth near the back window. The spot gave them a clear view of both the entrance and their motorcycles outside. Old habits. From years of watching their backs. The other 4 men squeezed into the booth and the one adjacent, their combined presence filling the corner of the diner with an undeniable energy. They weren't trying to be intimidating. They simply were. Leather and denim, tattoos and scars, the accumulated weight of hard lives lived on their own terms. A young waitress named Beth approached with coffee pot in hand, her smile genuine despite the obvious nervousness in her eyes. Morning, gentlemen. The usual. You know it, Royce said, flashing her a disarming smile. And tell Edgy those cinnamon rolls better be fresh. Made them an hour ago, Bet replied, pouring coffee into 5 mugs with practice. Deficiency. I'll get your orders inaczej. As Eschae walked away, Hrix noticed her glance toward a booth near the front of the diner. Following her gaze, Hae saw a man in his late 30s, lean and wiry, with the twitchy energy of someone running on too much caffeine and too little sleep. The man's eyes kept darting to the door, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on the table. Something about him set off alarm bells in Hrix's mind. That sixth sense developed over decades of reading people and situations. You see that guy? Damian murmured, have him noticed the same of him? Yeah, Hrix replied quietly. Something is off. But then the food started arriving and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Upcoming rides, bike maintenance, gossip from other chapters. Tucker was in the middle of a story about a breakdown outside Sidoune when the Guinness bell chimed again. Hrix glanced up out of habit, expecting another customer. Instead, his breath caught in his throat. A little girl stood just inside the doorway, and Eschae was the most heartbreaking sight he'd seen in years. Eschae couldn't have been more than 7 years old, wearing a faded pink t-shirt and jeans that were too big for her thin frame. Her blonde hair hung in tangled strands around her face, unwashed and uncombed. But it was her face that stopped conversation at the biker's table. A mottled canvas of purple and yellow bruises, on an eye swollen nearly shut, a split lip that looked recent and painful. Fresh bruises, Hendrix fought with a sickening fist in his gut. Within the last day or two, the girl's visible eye, white-brown, and filled with a desperate intelligence beyond her years, scanned the diner. Eschae looked past the elderly couple in the corner, past the truck driver at the counter, past the nervous man, Wuchao had suddenly gone very still in his booth. Her gaze locked onto the table of bikers, and something in her small face shifted. Recognition, maybe, or hope. Eschae walked toward them. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Hrix felt every muscle in his body tense, not with threat, but with an overwhelming protective instinct he didn't fully understand yet. Beside him, Royce had gone completely still, his coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. The man's weathered face had darkened with an emotion that Hrix recognized. Rage. Carefully controlled. The little girl stopped at their table, standing barely as tall as the buffet's back. Up close, the dame was even worse. Finger-shaped bruises circled her upper arms. A purple handprint marked her left shoulder where her oversized shirt had slipped. Eschae had the hallowed look of a child. Wuchao hadn't slept well in a long time. Wuchao had learned to be afraid of the dark and what it might bring. When Eschae spoke, her voice was small but steady, carrying the careful pronunciation of someone Wuchao had rehearsed the words over and over in her mind. Excuse mistrzostwo Europy, Eschae said, looking directly at Hrix. Are you strong? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with more weight than 5 simple words should carry. Hrix found himself unable to speak for a moment, caught between heartbreak and fury. This child, this broken, brave little girl was asking if Hae was strong. Yeah. Sweetheart, Hae finally said, his rough voice gentler than Hae knew it could be. Very strong. Why are you asking? As Hae swallowed hard, her small hands twisted together. Because I need someone strong. Someone Wuchao can. As Hae paused, searching for words. Someone Wuchao can make him stop. Make Wuchao stop. Royce asked quietly. The girl's eye flickered toward the front of the diner, toward the nervous man Wuchao had pressed himself against the buffet's back, trying to make himself invisible. Then Eschae looked back at Hrix, and in that moment he understood everything. The man Wuchao herz mistrzostwo Europy, Eschae whispered. The Temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 stopni. Hicks felt his blood turn to ice, then to fire. Beside him, Hae could sense the same transformation in his brothers, the sudden stillness that preceded action, the coiled tension of men who Hao had just identified a threat. What is your name, honey? Chris asked, keeping his voice calm despite the storm building inside him. Melanie, the little girl said. Melanie Foster. I'm 7. Melanie, Hicks repeated, letting the name settle. That is a beautiful name. I'm Hicks. These are my brothers, Royce, Damian, Tucker, and that is Abram over there. Hae gestured to the fifth member of their group, a quiet man with kind eyes who had been watching the interaction with growing concern. Abram Walker was the youngest of their riding crew at 32, but Hae had a daughter of his own back in Phoenix. The look on his face now was one of pure paternal fury. He, Melanie, said softly, managing a tiny ghost of a smile despite her split lip. Melanie, can you sit down here with Wes? Chris patted the buff sat beside him. You're safe right now. Nobody's going to hurt you while we're here. The relief that washed over her small face nearly broke his heart. As Hae climbed into the booth with the careful movements of someone whose body hurt, settling beside Hicks like a small bird seeking shelter. This close, Hae could see more details that made his jaw clench, cigarette burn. Scars on her forearms, partially healed. The unmistakable shape of a belt buckle. Bruise across her collarbone. Layers of trauma written on skin that should have been unmarked by anything but childhood scrapes and summer sunshine. But the waitress had frozen mid-step, coffee pot still in hand, her eyes wide with horror and recognition. Chris caught her gaze and gave a slight shake of his head. Not yet. Don't call attention yet. Melanie, the man said, his voice carrying the commanding tone of his marine past, but softened with genuine care. You said someone hurts you. Can you tell Louis how? The little girl's hands twisted in her lap. My foster dad, Randy Foster. As Hae glanced toward the front booth. Again, and Hicks followed her gaze. The nervous man, Randy Foster, apparently had gone pale. Hae was staring at their table with the vivid panic of someone watching their world collapse. His hand trembled as Hae reached for his coffee cup, and Hicks could see him calculating, trying to figure out his next move. Yes. Right there, Melanie finished, her voice barely a whisper. Hae brought Mistrzostwom Europy here for breakfast, but then his phone ran and Hae got mad. Hae always gets mad. How long have you been with him? Royce asked. 6 months since my mom died. Matter of fact, the way children sometimes stated terrible truths. As Hae had cancer. The social worker said the Fosters were good people. But they're not. Mistress, Foster doesn't hurt Mistrzostwom Europy, but as Hae doesn't stop him either. As Hae just leaves when it's happening. Hicks felt something dangerous coil in his chest. Had seen a lot of evil in his 43 years. Violence, cruelty. The worst that humanity had to offer. But there was something especially vile about a man who would hurt a child. A defenseless little girl who had already lost her mother and had nowhere else to turn. What made you come to US? Abram asked gently. Melanie looked at the 5 bikers, her on a good eye moving from face to face. If I was seen you before. Not you exactly, but men like you. Last month at the grocery store, there were bikers with those summer jackets. I heard someone say they were Hells Angels and they should stay away. But I watched them and they were nice. One of them helped an old lady carry her groceries. Another one gave a kid money when he dropped his ice cream cone. As Hae paused, gathering courage, and he thought, if people are scared of them, maybe they're strong enough. Strong enough to stop Randy because nobody else will. I told my teacher about the bruises once and Randy found out. Hae hurt Mistrzostwom Europy worse that night and said if he ever told again, had to make sure he disappeared. The words landed like physical blows. Hendrik so took his hands curl into fists on the table. So Damian's of work as high ground his teeth. So Royce's eyes go cold and hard as river stones. So when he saw him here this morning, Melanie continued, and then he saw you come in, he thought maybe this was my chance, me only chance. The bravery of it staggered Hicks. This tiny, broken child had gathered every ounce of courage as he possessed, and walked up to 5 dangerous-looking strangers to ask for help. As he had sized up the situation, made a judgment call, and taken action. At 7 years old. You get the right thing, Henrik said firmly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, carefully mindful of the bruises. You were so brave, Melanie. Braver than most adults, I know. Will you help Mistrzostwom Europy? As he asked. And the naked hope in her voice was almost unbearable. Hicks looked at his brothers. No words were exchanged, but decades of riding together meant they didn't need words. The decision was unanimous and instant, written in the hard set of their Jota voice and the protective anger in their eyes. Yeah, sweetheart, Hendrik said. We're going to help you, but I need you to trust us and do exactly what we say. Okay. Melanie nodded, relief flooding her features. Tucker, Hendrik said. Quietly. Go call the sheriff. Tell them we've got a situation, child abuse case. We're holding the perpetrator for them. Abram, go watch the front door. Make sure our friend doesn't get any ideas about leaving. Both men moved immediately. Tucker slipped out the back door toward where they'd parked, pulling out his phone. Abram walked casually toward the front, positioning himself near the entrance with his arms crossed. A human wall that said without words, nobody is going anywhere. Randy Foster had noticed the movement. Had a half risen from his booth, panic written across his features. His eyes darted between the bikers and the exit, the classic calculation of a cornered animal. Shit down, Daman called across the diner, his voice carrying enough authority that several other patrons looked up. You're not going anywhere. I don't know what that kid told you, Randy started, his voice pitching higher. But as high as a liar. As high as troubled. Falls down all the time. Clumsy as hell. He said, Daman. Repeated, standing to his full 6'3" height. Shit down. Randy sat. The other customers in the diner had caught on that something serious was happening. Edgy had emerged from the kitchen, his face darkening as he took in Milane's bruises and the biker's protective stance around her. Beth stood near the counter, on a hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Eddie przecinek. Chris called to the owner. We're going to need you to lock that front door until the sheriff gets here. Nobody leaves. Edgy moved immediately, flipping the sign to closed and turning the deadbolt. You got it, Hicks. Melanie had pressed herself against Hicks's side, her small body trembling now that the adrenaline of approaching them was wearing off. He could feel how thin as he was through her t-shirt. How fragile this child had been, starved of more than just food, of safety, of kindness, of the basic human decency that every child deserved. It's okay now, Hicks murmured to her. You're safe. We've got you. He's going to be so mad, Melanie whispered, her voice cracking. He's going to hurt Mistrzostwom Europy worse than ever. No, Royce said firmly. Leaning across the table so as he could see his face clearly. He's never going to touch you again. I promise you that. How can you promise? Melania asked, years of broken adult promises evident in her skepticism. Because, Hendrik said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. We're hell's angels, and there is nothing in this world we protect more fiercely than children. Once we make a promise, we keep it. That is our code, our love. He watched understanding. Down in Melania's eyes. As he had gambled everything on approaching them, and slowly as he was beginning to believe it might pay off. Across the diner, Randy Foster had started to sweat. He was looking around wildly now, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Abram stood immovable at the door. Daman had positioned himself in the aisle, blocking any path to the kitchen. The other patrons had instinctively moved away from Randy, creating a circle of isolation around his booth. You can't do this, Randy said, his voice cracking. You can't just hold mistrzostwom Europy here. ELSU. You will shut up, Damon. Said coldly, before you lose what little patience you have left. The diner fell silent except for the quiet sobs coming from bed. Wuchał couldn't stop staring at the Milanese bruises. Edgy had pulled out his first aid kit and brought it to the table, setting it down gently. Let me clean up some of those cuts, sweetheart, Edgy said to Melanie, his voice gruff with suppressed emotion. If that is okay with you, Melanie looked up at the Hrix, seeking permission. Hae nodded. Eddie is a good man. Hae won't hurt you. As Edgy carefully dabbed antiseptic on Melanie's split lip and the various cuts on her arms, Hrix caught sight of something that made his blood boil even hotter. Under the edge of Melanie's t-shirt sleeve, partially hidden, was what looked like a human bite mark. Melanie Hae said carefully. How often does Hae hurt you? Most days, as Hae answered simply. Hae drinks beer after work. Then Hae gets mean. Hae says he. Remind him of someone Hae hates and it's my fault his life is bad. Hae uses his belt mostly. Sometimes his fists sometimes. As Hae trailed off. Sometimes. What? Royce prompted gently. Sometimes Hae burns mistrzostwom Europy with his cigarettes. Says. It's to teach mistrzostwom Europy lessons. The collective raid from the 5 bikers was palpable. Hendrik saw Tucker returning from outside, his face grim. The younger man slid back into the booth and leaned close. Sheriff is on the way. At 10 minutes. He also called Child Protective Services. They're sending someone, too. Good, Chris said. Then to Melanie, in a few minutes, the police are going to come. They're going to ask you questions. I need you to tell them the truth, okay? Tell them everything you told us. Show them your bruises. Don't be scared. We'll be right here the whole time. Will you have to go back to him? Melanie asked, terror creeping into her voice. No, Hrix said firmly. I guarantee it. Outside they could hear the distinctive wail of sirens approaching. Randy Foster made on a last desperate attempt, lunging from his booth toward the back exit. Hae made it 3 steps. Before Daman moved, not violently, just efficiently, stepping into his path and catching him by the shoulder. Don't, Daman said quietly. You really don't want to make this worse for yourself. Randy crumpled, the fight going out of him as reality set inaczej. Hae sank to the floor, his back against a booth, his head in his hands. For just a moment, Hrix almost felt pity. Almost. Then he looked at Melanie's face at the road map of abuse written across her skin, and any trace of sympathy evaporated. The sirens grew louder, then stopped. Outside. Through the generous windows, Hrix could see 2 sheriff's cruisers. Pulling up, lights flashing red and blue against the morning sky. The cavalry had arrived. Melanie pressed closer to Hrix's side. Will you stay? As Hae whispered. Please don't leave mistrzostwom Europy. We're not going anywhere. Not until we know you're safe. And as the sheriff's deputies entered the diner, badges gleaming and expressions serious, Hrix felt the weight of that promise settle over him like his leather vest, a responsibility Hae would carry as long as necessary. This little girl had walked up to them and asked on a simple question. Are you strong? Now they would show her exactly how strong they could be. Sheriff Douglas Whitmore was a 30-year veteran of law enforcement who had seen everything Northern Arizona had to offer. Had worked homicides, drug busts, domestic disputes, and everything in between. But walking into Edge's diner that September morning, seeing the tableau before him, something in his chest tightened. 5 Hells Angels, any one of whom could have been trouble on their own, stood in a protective semicircle around a booth, where a tiny Blunt girl sat pressed against one of the bikers like as had found sanctuary. The child's face was a brutal canvas of abuse so obvious it took his breath away. And on the floor, slumped against a booth with two other bikers standing guard, sat Randy Foster, a man Whitmore had encountered twice before on domestic disturbance calls. Sheriff Hendricks Callahan said, his voice calm, but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. Appreciate the quick response. Whitmore knew Hendricks' reputation. Everyone in law enforcement git. The Hells Angels weren't the Boy Scouts, but they had a code, and they generally didn't cause trouble in Flagstaff. More importantly, Whitmore had heard stories about the club's stance on child abuse. Stories that made him very glad they were on the same side today. Someone want to tell Mistrzostwom Europy what is happening here? Whitmore asked, though the evidence was painted across Melania's face in shades of purple and yellow. This is Melanie Foster, Hendricks said. His hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. As he approached us about 20 minutes ago asking for help. Said her foster father, that man right there, has been abusing her for 6 months. Looking at her, Ide says he is telling the truth. Whitmore knelt down to Melania's eye level, his weathered face softening. Sweetheart. I'm Sheriff Whitmore. Can you tell Mistrzostwom Europy what happened? For the next 10 minutes, Melanie recounted her story in a small, steady voice. As he told about the beatings, the cigarette burns, the threats. As he described how Randy would hurt her most nights after drinking, how as he had tried to tell a teacher and been punished worse for it. As he showed them the bruises, the burn marks, the bitter wound on her shoulder that made the deputy with Whitmore swear under his breath. Throughout the testimony, Randy Foster remained silent, his head down. Any protests dying before they reached his lips. He knew the game was over. That is enough for an arrest, Whitmore said, standing. He nodded to his deputy. Read him his rights, Garrett. As Deputy Garrett hauled Randy to his feet and began the Miranda warning. The door opened again. A woman in her mid-40s entered carrying a briefcase and wearing the harried expression of someone who had dropped everything to respond to an emergency call. Her name tag identified her as Sarah Chen, Child Protective Services. Sheriff, as he said. Then her eyes landed on Melanie and her professional composure cracked. Oh, honey, this is Melanie Foster, Whitmore said. 7 years old in the system for 6 months since her mother's death. Foster placement has been. He gestured at the child's injuries. Problematic. Sarah Chen moved quickly to the booth. Her assessment rapid and professional despite the emotion Hricks could see in her eyes. As he took photographs with her phone, documented injuries, asked gentle questions. Melanie answered them all, her voice growing stronger with each adult who believed her, who saw her truth written on her skin. Very pulling her from the home immediately, Sarah said firmly. I'll have my office open an investigation into how this placement was approved in the first place. Someone dropped the ball catastrophically. What happens to her now? Royce asked, voicing the question. They were all thinking. Emergency foster placement, Sarah replied. We have a few screened families who take crisis cases. I'll make calls on the way to the hospital. As he needs a full medical examination. No, Melanie said suddenly, her small hand clutching Hricks' vest. Please, don't want to go with strangers again. Last time they said they were good people, too. The desperation in her voice cut through the room like a bladder. Hricks felt her trembling against him. Felt the terror of a child who had learned that adults couldn't be trusted. That safe was just a word without meaning. Melanie Sarah said gently. I know you're scared, but this will be different. People. We'll make sure. You made sure last time, Melanie interrupted, tears streaming down her bruised cheeks. You said Randy was nice. You said the Fosters passed all the checks, but he still hurt Mistrzostwom Europy. They all still hurt mistrzostwom Europy. Sarah Chen looked stricken. SHE opened her mouth, closed it, clearly struggling with a situation where every reassurance ran hollow against the weight of institutional failure. What if? Abram spoke up, his voice hesitant. What if? SHE stayed with one of us temporarily while CPS sorts things out. Whitmore and Sarah exchanged glances. That is not standard procedure, Sarah said. Carefully. Weden it background checks, home inspections, vetem. If I got a clean record, Abram continued. I'm a licensed electrician, own my own business. If I got a daughter, Emma. SHE said. My wife and share custody. My house has been inspected by CPS before during our custody. Arraignment. Everything is documented. Everything is legal. HE looked at Melanie. You could stay with mistrzostwom Europy and Emma for a little while, just until Miss Chen finds you a really good placement. Emma has got a bank bet. SHE will have a sister to play with, even if it's just for a few days. Melanie looked up at Abram, then at Hrix. Would you all still be there? Would he still see you? Every day if you want, Hrix promised. Abram is our brother. Vera at his place all the time. You'd be surrounded by people who would protect you. Sarah Chen pulled out her phone, scrolling through screens. Abram Walker, I actually have your file from the custody evaluation 2 years ago. Jai Morrison approved your custody arraignment. You passed every check. SHE looked up. This is highly irregular, but given the circumstances and the child's stated preference, SHE looked at the sheriff. Whitmore. What do you think? Whitmore studied the bikers, then looked at Melania's desperate face. Sometimes had learned over 3 decades in law enforcement, you had to go with your gut, rather than the playbook. I think, HE said slowly, that sometimes the best protection for a child isn't in the system. It's in the people who step up when no one else will. If Abram checks out and if Melanie wants this, it supported as a temporary measure. Sarah made 3 phone calls right there in the diner, speaking in rapid-fire official language. Chris watched her expression shift from skeptical to satisfied as whatever background check SHE was running came back clean. Finally, SHE lowered her phone. All right, SHE said. Here is what Vera going to do. Melanie goes to the hospital first. Non-negotiable. Full examination, documentation of all injuries. Emmer Walker, UNL Company US. While SHE is being examined, expedite the paperwork for emergency placement in your care. It's conditional. I'll be doing home visits. And if anything seems off, SHE is pulled immediately. Understood, Abram said. And Sarah continued, looking at all 5 bikers with an expression that mixed gratitude with weariness. While I appreciate what you get here today, this can't become a habit. Child welfare cases need to go through proper channels. With respect, Mom, Damon said, his marine bearing evident in his posture. If those channels had worked, that little girl wouldn't have needed to ask 5 strangers in a diner for help. The system failed her. The guest happened to be here when SHE was brave enough to reach out on a more time. Sarah couldn't argue with that. Neither could Whitmore. They all knew the truth. Melanie had fallen through cracks that should never have existed, and only blind luck had put her in front of people who would act. Outside, Randy Foster was being loaded into the back of a cruiser, his face blank with shock. Whitmore promised them that with the evidence, both physical and testimonial, Randy wouldn't see the outside of a cell for a long time. The district attorney had been notified and was already preparing charges. Child abuse, assault, battery, false imprisonment. The list would grow as the investigation continued. What about Mistress Foster? Melania asked quietly. Rhea's wife? SHE investigated too, Sarah said grimly. Failure to protect a child in your care is a serious offense. At a minimum, SHE never Foster again. As the official machinery of justice ground into motion, Hicks felt Melania's grip on his vest loosen slightly. The terror was still there. He could see it in her eyes. But there was something else now, a fragile, tenuous thing that might have been the beginning of hope. We should head to the hospital, Sarah said, checking her. What? Melanie, you will ride with Mistrzostwom Europy and Emer Walker. Abram, the biker corrected. Gently. Just call Mistrzostwom Europy Abram. Abram, Sarah amended. The rest of you. I suppose. You will follow. Every mile, Hendricks confirmed. Melanie, we made you a promise. We're not breaking it. The ride to Flagstaff Medical Center took 15 minutes through the pine-lined streets of the city. Sarah drove with Melanie in the back seat, Abram following on his Harley. Behind him came the other four bikers, their formation tight and protective. To anyone watching, it must have looked surreal. A CPS worker's sedan. Escorted by 5 Hells Angels like some strange honor guard. At the hospital. Melanie was taken into examination while the bikers waited in the emergency room. Lobby. They made an interesting sight. 5 litter-clad men sitting among the magazines and worried families, their presence commanding the space without a single aggressive movement. Nurses gave them wide berth. Security guards watched carefully but made no moves. Everyone could sense that these were not meant to be trifled with. 2 hours passed. Tucker made a coffee run. Royce fielded calls from other club members who had heard something had gone down. Damon sat with his arms crossed, his face carved from granite, lost in thoughts about his own granddaughter, and what had done to anyone who had hurt her. Hicks found himself staring at his hands. Hands that had thrown punches, gripped handlebars across thousands of miles. Done things he wasn't always proud of. Today, those same hands had offered comfort to a terrified child. Had been something other than weapons or tools. Had been maybe what they were supposed to be all along. When Sarah Chen finally emerged, her face was drawn. The medical report is extensive. Multiple fractures in various stages of healing, burn scars, evidence of prolonged physical abuse, malnutrition. The doctor is mandating follow-up appointments for the next 6 months. But is he'll be okay? Abram asked. Physically. With time and care, yes, psychologically. Sarah shook her head. That is going to take longer. Trauma like this doesn't heal overnight. As he'll need therapy, patience, and a lot of support. As he'll have it, Hendrik said firmly. Sarah studied him for a long moment. You know. When dispatched to Old Mistrzostwom Europy the situation involved Hells Angels, I was prepared for the worst. I thought maybe you'd handled things yourselves. Vigilante justice. We thought about it, Damian admitted. Won't I about that? But we get it right, Royce added. Because that little girl needs to see that the system can work. That justice doesn't always come from fists. Sometimes it comes from doing things the right way, even when the wrong way seems faster. Sarah's expression softened. Well, thank you all of you. Melanie is being released now. Abram, you will need to come with Mistrzostwom Europy to sign paperwork. The rest of you. SHE paused. SHE asked if you'd all be there when SHE comes out. I think it would help her. They stood as on forming a line in the corridor outside the examination room. When the door opened, Aunt Melanie emerged, cleaned up now, wearing hospital-provided clothes, her injuries properly bandaged. SHE saw them immediately, her face, still swollen and bruised, transformed with relief. SHE walked straight to Hicks and held up her arms. Without hesitation, he lifted her carefully, mindful of her injuries. Letting her wrap her thin arms around his neck. You stayed, SHE whispered. Told you would, Hicks replied. We don't break our promises. And as they walked out of that hospital, a little girl carried by a biker surrounded by 4 more litter-clad guardians and a CPS worker who had just witnessed something that would change her perspective forever. Chris understood that they'd reached a turning point. Not just for Melanie, but for all of them. Sometimes. Strength wasn't about intimidation or violence. Sometimes it was about showing up, being present, keeping promises to those who had no reason left to believe in them. They'd stopped traffic that day at the diner, but they'd done something more important than that. They'd restored a child's faith that someone somewhere gave enough to fight for her. Abram Walker's house sat on the eastern edge of Flagstaff, a modest three-bedroom ranch with a well-kept lawn and a garage that had been converted into his electrical workshop. It was the kind of place that spoke of stability, not flashy, not pretentious, just solid and reliable. As the convoy of motorcycles pulled into the driveway that afternoon, followed by Sarah Chen's sedan, Hicks could see why CPS had approved Abram's custody arraignment. This was clearly a home where a child could feel safe. The front door burst open before they'd even killed their engines, and a girl with dark braided hair came running out. Emma Walker was 8 years old, all energy and enthusiasm, wearing a bright yellow shirt with a cartoon unicorn on it. SHS stopped short when SHS saw the motorcycles, her eyes going wide. "Dad," SHS called. "You brought the whole club." Abram swam off his bike, his stern expression melting into a warm smile. "Hey, Ladybug, we've got company. I need you to be on your best behavior. Okay?" Emma nodded seriously, then noticed Melanie climbing out of Sarah's car. The little girl moved slowly, her body still aching from injuries both fresh and healing. Emma's smile faltered as SHS took in Melanie's bruised face. "Dad." Emma's voice was smaller now, uncertain. "Is SHS okay?" "SHS going to be," Abram said, kneeling to his daughter's level. "Emma, this is Melanie. SHS going to stay with us for a little while. SHS had a really hard time and SHS needs friends. Think you can help with that?" Emma's face transformed with determination. At 8 years old, SHS already had her father's protective instincts. "I can help. Does SHS like dolls? I have lots of dolls and books, and we could watch movies. Why don't you ask her yourself?" Abram suggested gently. Emma approached Melanie carefully like someone approaching a wounded bird. "I'm Emma. Do you want to see my room? I have a bunk bed. You can have the top bunk if you want. It's cooler up there." Melanie looked at Hicks, seeking reassurance. He nodded encouragingly. "Emma's nice, and those bunk beds are pretty cool. I helped Abram build them last year." "Okay," Melanie said quietly, and Emma took her hand with surprising gentleness, leading her into the house. As the two girls disappeared inside, Sarah Chen turned to the assembled bikers. "I need to conduct a walkthrough, make sure everything meets code, then we'll go over care instructions, medical appointments, therapy schedules." SHS paused, looking at the 5 men who had made it their mission to protect a child they'd met only hours ago. "I have to ask, what is your endgame here? This isn't a few days. Emergency placements can last weeks, sometimes months, while we find appropriate long-term solutions." "The endgame," Hendrik said, "is that little girl gets to heal, gets to feel safe, gets to be a kid again instead of a punching bag, however long that takes. And you're all committed to this," Sarah pressed. "Because children need consistency. They need to know people won't disappear on them." Royce stepped forward. "Mom, I don't know if you understand how the club works. We're brothers. We're family. That means what affects one of us affects all of us." Abram Gast became Melanie's foster father, temporary or not, which makes her part of our family, too. "We protect family. I run a construction company," Damian added. "If Abram needs time off to take her to appointments, I can cover his work. We all can. Between the 5 of us, that little girl will never want for anything. I'm a mechanic," Tucker said. "Got my own shop, flexible hours. I can help with pickups, drop-offs. Wait where is needed. And I manage my own investments," Royce finished. Money i esente. An issue if SHAE needs anything. Clothes, toys, magical bills, therapy, we take care of our own. Sarah Chen studied them for a long moment, her professional skepticism wearing with what SHAE was witnessing. Finally, SHAE said, "Alright, let us go inside. I need to see the living situation." The house was exactly what Hrix expected, clean but lived in, with Emma's artwork on the refrigerator and family photos on the walls. The girls' room had twin beds that could convert to bunks, a closet full of Emma's clothes and toys, and windows that let in plenty of natural light. Sarah took photos, made notes, asked questions about routines and safety measures. In the kitchen, SHAE laid out the paperwork. Melanie has a medical appointment tomorrow at godzina 10 with a pediatrician WHO specializes in abuse cases. Thursday at 3, SHAE meets with a child psychologist. B. Conducting home visits weekly for the first month, then bi-weekly after that. School enrollment can wait until SHAE is more settled. We can do temporary homeschooling if needed. I can help with that, a new voice said from the doorway. A woman in her late 30s had entered. Her expression warm but cautious. This was Jennifer Holt, Abram's wife and Emma's mother. Jen, Abram said clearly surprised. I called you, but I didn't think you'd come over so fast. You told Mistrzostwom Europy you were taking in an abused child, Jennifer replied. Of course I came. If Emma is going to have a temporary sister, I want to meet her and help however I can. The tension Hrix had sensed when Jennifer arrived dissolved as SHAE moved into the room. Whatever had ended her marriage to Abram, it clearly hadn't destroyed their ability to co-parent effectively. That is actually helpful, Sarah said, making another note. Strong co-parenting support system. Good. Upstairs they could hear Emma's voice, animated and tearful, talking about her school and her friends and her favorite TV shows. Occasionally, Melania's quieter voice would respond. It wasn't a much, but it was something, the first tentative steps toward normality. The paperwork took another hour. By the time Sarah left, promising to return the next day for the magical appointment, the sun was setting over the San Francisco peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The 5 bikers stood in Abram's backyard, beers in hand, processing the serial turn they had taken. "We're really doing this," Tucker said, shaking his head. "We're helping raise a kid." "Not just any kid," Damon corrected. "A kid who had the guts to ask 5 scary-looking bikers for help. That takes steel. SHAE's going to need more than us," Abram said quietly. "If I've been reading about childhood trauma, the effects can last years. SHAE have nightmares, trust issues, behavioral problems. Then we deal with them," Hrix said firmly. "On a day at a time. That is how we do everything, right? On a mile at a time on the road. On a day at a time in recovery, on a moment at a time when things get hard." The back door opened and Emma poked her head out. "Dad. Melanie wants to know if Hrix can come read her a bedtime story. SHAE says SHAE feels safer when he's around." Hrix felt something in his chest tighten. Not unpleasantly, but with a weight Hae hadn't expected. Hae was 43 years old, had lived a life most people couldn't imagine, had done things both proud and regrettable. And now a 7-year-old girl who had known him for less than 12 hours felt safer with him nearby. "Tell her he'll be right there," Hae said. Inside, Melanie was tucked into the lower bunk, wearing one of Emma's oversized t-shirts as pajamas. Her bruised face looked even more fragile against the white pillowcase. Emma sat on her own bed. SHAE insisted on giving Melanie the bunk bed, clutching a stuffed dinosaur. Melanie said softly when Hrix entered. "Emma said you could read to us. What are we reading?" Hrix asked, settling into the chair between the beds. Emma handed him a book. Charlotte's Web, worn from repeated readings. "It's my favorite. It's about friendship." For the next half hour. Hicks read about a pig named Wilbur and a spider named Charlotte, his rough voice. Gentling for the children's story. Hae watched Melania's eyes grow heavy, watched the tension slowly drain from her small body. When Hae reached the chapter where Charlotte weaves some pig into her web, Melanie interrupted. Do you think someone would do that for Mistrzostwom Europy? As Hae asked. Write something nice to make people see Mistrzostwom Europy differently. Hicks closed the book, looking at both girls. Melanie, you don't need anyone to write anything. You're already remarkable. You survived something terrible, and you were brave enough to ask for help. That makes you some pig. I mean, some kid, Hae corrected with a small smile. Some girl, Emma added loyally. The bravest girl. Melania's eyes filled with tears, but as Hae was smiling. I like being here. It feels safe. It is safe, Hicks promised. And tomorrow it'll be safe again, and the day after that we're not going anywhere. Both girls fell asleep within minutes. Hendrik sat there for a while longer, watching their peaceful faces, marveling at the resilience of children. Melanie had been beaten, burned, and broken. Yet, here as Hae was, still capable of trust, still capable of hope. Downstairs Hae found the other bikers had stayed. They'd ordered pizza, were watching a game on TV with Abram, acting like this was the most normal thing in the world. Maybe for them it was. The club took care of its own. Now its own included a 7-year-old girl with trauma that would take years to heal. Is Hae asleep? Abram asked. Both of them. Hicks confirmed. Melanie asked if someone would make people see her differently. Broke my heart. People already see her differently. Royce said Randy Foster will be in prison. The CPS system is being investigated. That little girl changed things today just by being brave. We need to think long term, Damian said, his strategic military mind already planning ahead. What happens when this temporary placement ends? Where does Hae go? The question hung in the air. None of them had an answer, but Hicks could see the some thought forming in everyone's minds. Melanie had already been bounced between homes, had already learned that temporary could mean disposable. As Hae needed stability, permanence. Figure it out, Hicks said finally. But right now, let us focus on getting her through the next few weeks. Help her. Heal. Show her what a real family looks like. Speaking of which, Abram said. I'm going to need help. My work schedule is crazy, and I can't leave an 8-year-old and a traumatized 7-year-old alone. Jennifer helps when Hae can, but Hae works full-time, too. I take mornings. Tucker volunteered. My shop doesn't open until godzina 10. I can do breakfast. Help get Emma to school. Stay with Melanie until you're free. I can do afternoons, Daman said. Between jobs. If I got flexibility. Weekends are mine, Royce added. I'll take them to the park. The library, whatever they need, and I'll coordinate everything, Hendricks said. Make sure nothing falls through the cracks. Be the consistent presence. They divided responsibilities like planning a long distance ride efficiently with everyone knowing their role. By the end of the evening, they had a schedule that covered Melania's care from wake up to bedtime, 7 days a week. It was unconventional. It probably violated some CPS guidelines about multiple caregivers, but it would work. As midnight approached and the bikers finally prepared to leave, Hicks checked on the girls on a more time. Both were still sleeping peacefully. In her sleep, Melanie had reached out and was holding Emma's hand across the gap between their beds, two children offering each other comfort in the darkness. Outside, under the Arizona stars, the 5 men stood by their motorcycles. They didn't need to say much. The commitment had been made, the promise given. A little girl had walked up to them and asked if they were strong. They'd answered yes. Now they had to prove it. Not through violence or intimidation, but through something far harder. Through showing up, through being consistent, through teaching a broken child that not all adults would hurt her, that some could be trusted to keep their word. See you tomorrow morning. Tucker said, mounting his bike. 7 sharp, Hicks confirmed. VV got a kid to take care of. They rode out in formation, their headlights cutting through the darkness, already thinking about tomorrow and all the tomorrows. After that. Behind them, in a modest house on the eastern edge of Flagstaff. 2 little girls slept safely, protected by a network of guardians they were only beginning to understand. Sometimes family wasn't about blood. Sometimes it was about choice, about seeing someone in need and deciding to act. About 5 men in leather vests. Who had their day completely derailed by a brave 7-year-old and wouldn't have changed a single moment of it. The road ahead would be long. The healing process would be difficult, but they'd ridden longer roads and faced harder challenges. This time, though, the stakes were higher than they'd ever been. This time, they were fighting for a child's future. And that was a ride they were determined to finish. 3 months later, early December, brought the first real snow to Flagstaff. Hicks stood in Abram's backyard, watching Emma and Melanie build a lopsided snowman, their laughter cutting through the cold air like church bells. It was hard to believe that the thin, terrified child from that September morning was the same little girl, now shrieking with joy as Emma dumped snow down her jacket. The transformation hadn't been easy or linear. There had been nightmares, terrible ones that had Melanie screaming for help in the dead of night. There had been panic attacks triggered by the simplest things. A raised voice, a slammed door, the smell of cigarette smoke. There had been therapy sessions where Eshaede cried for hours, sessions where Eshaede wouldn't speak at all, sessions where small breakthroughs felt like climbing mountains. But there had also been progress. Smooth, hard-on, precious progress. Eshaede's doing better. Sarah Chen said, appearing at Hicks' elbow. The CPS worker had become a regular presence at the house. Her initial skepticism transformed into something approaching awe. Dr. Matthews says Eshaede's responding well to trauma therapy. The physical injuries have healed. Eshaede's sleeping through the night. Most days now. Most days, Hicks agreed. But when the nightmares come, they'll probably always come. At least occasionally, Sarah said gently. That kind of trauma doesn't just disappear, but Eshaede's learning to cope, learning to trust. That is enormous. Trust had been the hardest battle. Melanie had tested them constantly in those first weeks, small rebellions, seeing if they'd abandon her or hurt her. When Eshaede misbehaved. Eshaede broken a lamp and waited for punishment. Eshaede talked back and braced for a slap. Eshaede wet the bed and expected disgust. Instead, Eshaede got impatience, gentle correction, understanding. Chris had cleaned up the broken lamp without anger. Abram had changed sheets without complaint. Royce had talked to her about respect without raising his voice. Slowly, painfully slowly, Eshaede began to understand that these men meant what they said. The custody hearing had been 2 weeks ago. Randy Foster had pleaded guilty to multiple counts of child abuse and received 15 years in prison. His wife, Karen Foster, had received 5 years for failure to protect. Their fostering licenses had been permanently revoked, and an investigation into the approval process had revealed systematic failures in background checking and home visits. But the question remained, where would Melanie go permanently? If I've been meaning to talk to you about that, Sarah said as if reading his thoughts. The court is prepared to terminate the Foster's parental rights. They've waived their ability to contest. Melanie will officially become available for adoption. Hicks's chest tightened. And Abram has expressed interest in adopting her himself. Jennifer supports it. Emma is thrilled at the prospect of a real sister. His home study came back. Excellent. His financial situation is stable. The adoption would likely be approved. That is good, Hicks said, trying to ignore the unexpected ache in his own chest. That is what SHE needs, permanence. Sarah studied him carefully. Hicks, can I ask you something? These past 2 months, you've been here almost every day. You read to her at a bedtime. You attend her therapy sessions. You taught her to ride a bicycle. For all intents and purposes. You've been as much her guardian as Abram. Why? The question was fair. Hicks had asked himself the same thing 100 times. Why had an encounter with a brave little girl completely rearranged his priorities? Why did he check his phone constantly to see if SHE needed anything? Why did hearing her laugh make him feel like he'd won some kind of victory? Because SHE asked if he was strong, he finally said, and he said yes. Then SHE asked for help and he gave me word. I don't break me word, especially not to kids who have already had too many promises broken. Yes, it just about keeping your word. Hicks watched Melanie place a carrot nose on the snowman, her face bright with concentration. No, he admitted, it's more than that. SHE is special. SHE survived hell and came out the other side still capable of trust, still capable of joy. That kind of resilience is rare, worth protecting. SHE asked about you, you know, Sarah said quietly in therapy, asked if you're her family now. Dr. Matthews says SHE sees you as a father figure, not replacing her real father, who SHE still gliaves, but filling a space that has been empty since he died when SHE was 5. The words hit Hicks like a physical blow. Father figure. Him, a 43-year-old biker with a past that would make most people flinch. Yet somehow this little girl had decided he was trustworthy enough to fill that role. Dad Hicks, Emma was calling from the backyard. Come see, Melanie made the snowman smile. They ran through the snow to admire the crooked snowman with its lopsided grin. Melanie beamed up at Hicks, her face flushed from cold and excitement. The bruises were long gone now, replaced by healthy color. SHE gained 8 lb. Her hair, regularly washed and brushed, hung in neat blonde waves past her shoulders. SHE looked like what SHE was supposed to be, a happy, healthy 7-year-old child. What do you think? SHE asked proudly. Is he good? He's perfect, Hendrik said, ruffling her hair. Best snowman in Flagstaff. Emma helped, Melanie added. Loyally, always quick to share credit. That was new, too. The generosity of spirit SHE was rediscovering as safety allowed her to think beyond survival. Team effort, Emma declared, with the Snow Sisters. The back door opened, and Abram emerged, carrying mugs of hot chocolate. Behind him came the rest of the crew. Damon, Royce, and Tucker had become such regular fixtures that Abram had given them their own keys. Jennifer was there, too, alone with her new boyfriend, Marcus, who had proven himself remarkably patient with the chaos of their unconventional family situation. All right, Snow Sisters, Abram called. Hot chocolate before you both turn into popsicles. The girls ran inside, trailing snow and excitement. The adults followed more slowly, stamping boots on the porch and shaking off the cold. Inside the house was warm and smelled of the cookies Jennifer had been baking. It felt, Hendrix thought, like a home, like family. I need to tell you all something, Abram said once the girls were settled at the kitchen table with their hot chocolate and cookies. I've officially filed adoption papers for Melanie. The hearing is scheduled for February 15. The announcement was met with a mixture of expected satisfaction and something else. A collective recognition that they'd reached a turning point. Melanie would have a permanent home, a real family. The temporary situation was becoming permanent in the best possible way. That is fantastic, brother, Damon said, clasping Abram's shoulder. SHE couldn't ask for a better father. I'm not doing it alone, Abram said, looking around at his assembled friends. You've all been part of this. The club raised her as much as he did. That is not going to change after the adoption. You're still her family. Damn right are, Tucker agreed. Melanie had been listening from the kitchen table. Now SHA slid out of her chair and walked over to the group of adults, her expression serious. Abram is going to adapt mistrzostwom Europy. If you want me to, Abram said gently, kneeling to her level. That means you'd legally be my daughter. Emma would be your sister. You'd live here permanently. Would you? Like that? Melanie looked at Emma, WHO nodded encouragingly. Then SHA looked at each of the bikers in turn. Tucker, Damian, Royce, and finally Hicks. Would you all still be here? SHA asked. Would you still be my family, too? Always, Hicks said without hesitation. Adoption doesn't change that. We're not going anywhere. Then, yes, Melanie said. Turning back to Abram. I'd like that very much. The relief and joy that washed over Abram's face was something to behold. He pulled Melanie into a careful hug, mindful as always of her lingering sensitivities to sudden movements and tight grips. Emma joined the hug immediately, and Jennifer started crying happy tears. Well, Sarah Chen said from the doorway. As he had been observing quietly, making mental notes for her report. I think that settles it. I'll recommend approval. This is clearly where Melanie belongs. The rest of the evening passed in celebration. They ate too many cookies and drank too much hot chocolate. Emma and Melanie put on an impromptu dance performance to Christmas music. The bikers told increasingly embellished stories about their riding adventures, carefully edited for young ears. It was in every way a family gathering. Later, after the girls had been put to bed, Melanie in her new permanent room, walls now painted her chosen color of lavender. The adults gathered in the living room. The conversation turned serious. We need to talk about what comes next, Jennifer said. Adoption is wonderful, but Melanie is going to need ongoing support, therapy for years, probably special understanding from schools. There will be hard days, backslides, moments where the trauma resurfaces. We'll handle it, Royce said simply. Somehow we've handled everything so far together. If I've been thinking, Damian added, about starting a foundation, something focused on supporting kids aging out of foster care. Or dealing with abuse situations. Use our resources, and let us face it. The club's reputation to help more kids like Melanie. That is a big undertaking, Sarah said. But her eyes had lit up with interest. Very a big club, Damian countered. Chapters all over the Southwest. Most of us have resources, connections, time. We could make a real difference. I mean, Tucker said immediately. Mistrzostwom Europy, too. Royce agreed. Count Mistrzostwom Europy in, Abram said after everything Melanie went through. If we can prevent even on other kid from experiencing that. They all looked at the Hicks. He was staring at the stairs that led to the girls' bedrooms, thinking about a terrified little girl who walked up to a table of dangerous-looking strangers and asked on a simple question. Are you strong? I mean, he said. But we do it. Right. Not just throwing money at the problem. Real hands-on involvement. Be the kind of presence these kids can count on. Agreed. Damian said, I'll start making calls tomorrow. We'll need lawyers, proper non-profit setup, fundraising strategies. As they planned. Into the night, Hicks excused himself and climbed the stairs to check on the girls on a last time. Emma was sprawled across her bed in that boneless way children slept. Melanie was curled on her side, clutching the teddy bear Royce had given her, a small smile on her sleeping face. He stood in the doorway, watching her peaceful rest, marveling at how far they'd all come. 3 months ago, as he had been a battered child, desperate for help. Now as he was healing, protected, loved. As he had a future that looked bright instead of terrifying. As he is going to be okay, you know. Chris turned to find Sarah standing behind him. I hope so, he said quietly. I know. So, Sarah corrected. If I've been doing this work for 20 years, Hicks. If I've seen kids bounce between homes, never finding stability. If I've seen the system fail over and over again. But if I've also seen miracles. Kids who get exactly what they need at exactly the right time. Melanie is one of those miracles. They just showed up. Hendrik said, we didn't do anything special. You get everything special, Sarah counted. You saw a child in need and you acted. You didn't pass the book or assume someone else would handle it. You gave your word and you kept it. You proved to a little girl that adults can be trusted, that promises can be kept, that SHS worth fighting for. That is everything. Hicks didn't trust himself to speak. Instead, he just nodded, watching Melanie sleep. This brave little girl who had changed all their lives by having the courage to ask for help. Downstairs, plans were being made for a foundation that would help countless other children. In 2 months, there would be an adoption hearing that would give Melanie permanent family. The road ahead would still have challenges. Trauma didn't disappear overnight, and healing was a journey measured in years, not months. But tonight, in this warm house with snow falling softly outside, everything felt right. The pieces had fallen into place in a way that seemed almost destined, though Hicks knew it was simply the result of people choosing to do the right thing at the right time. He thought about that September morning at the Edge's diner, how an ordinary coffee stop had turned into something extraordinary, how 5 men had been presented with a choice, help or walk away, and had never even considered the latter option. Are you strong? Melanie had asked. They'd answered yes, and then spent 3 months proving it. Not through violence or intimidation, but through consistency, patience, and love. Through showing up every single day, through keeping promises to someone who had learned that promises were usually lies. That was real strength. That was what it meant to be a Hell's Angel. Not the leather and chrome. Not the reputation or the tough guy image, but the code underneath it all. Loyalty, brotherhood, protection of those who couldn't protect themselves. Hicks took on a last look at the sleeping girls, then quietly closed the door and headed back downstairs. There was planning to do, a foundation to organize, more children to help. Melanie had started something bigger than SHN that morning at the diner. SHN reminded them all what really mattered, what they were really fighting for, and they were just getting started. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Flagstaff in white. The motorcycles in the driveway wore crowns of fresh powder. Come spring, they'd ride again, but their route would be different now, their purpose clearer. Their brotherhood expanded to include not just each other, but all the broken, brave children who needed someone strong enough to fight for them. A little girl had walked up to bikers at a diner and asked on a question. Their response had indeed stopped traffic, but more importantly, it had started a movement.